You buy a catamaran thinking you've solved the boat problem. 2 hulls, more space, no heeling, a floating apartment instead of a cramped cabin. It all makes sense until you actually own one, and then you start learning what the brochure didn't mention. Look, I'm not saying catamarans are bad boats. They're not. They're extremely good at what they do. The problem is that what they do brilliantly and what serious sailors need are often two completely different things. And the longer you own one, the more that disconnect becomes obvious. Let me be direct about this. The catamaran market has exploded. They're everywhere in the Caribbean, the Med, warm water anchorages. They dominate charter fleets. They look like the future of cruising. But there's a reason experienced sailors, the ones who've actually spent years living aboard, pushing boats offshore, dealing with real maintenance, still approach catamarans with a certain skepticism. It's not snobbery, it's experience. The real problem starts with something called bridge deck slamming. If you've never felt it, understand this: it's violent. It's not a gentle bump or a splash. It's an explosive slam that sounds like the boat is being hit from underneath. And it happens because of how the catamaran is built. A monohull cuts through water with one central body. One hull, one entry. A catamaran has 2 hulls, connected by a platform, and that creates a tunnel underneath. In calm water, perfect. In confused seas, especially when you're running into short, steep chop or head seas, that tunnel becomes a problem. When both hulls hit waves, water gets forced up into that gap. It piles under the bridge deck, and if the clearance isn't high enough, the underside of the platform gets hammered. Hard. Not every few hours, every few minutes sometimes. Most boat designers know about this. They try to manage it with bridge deck clearance, basically how much space there is between the water and the platform. A reasonable rule is that clearance should be around 6% of the boat's overall length. More clearance generally means less violent slamming. Less clearance means you're going to feel every wave. A modern 50-footer might have around 37 to 38 inches of clearance. An offshore-oriented 57-footer might push above 42 inches. These aren't random numbers. They're the difference between tolerable and punishing. But here's where the first compromise shows up. Buyers want interior volume. They want bigger cabins, lower cabin soles, more living space. So some builders effectively steal space from the tunnel. They lower the bridge deck. They add structure into that gap. They optimize for the marina, not the sea. The result? Reduced clearance. More slamming, more noise, more movement, more of that constant battering that wears on crew morale in ways people don't understand until they're living it. And morale offshore is not a luxury item, it's part of safety. When the crew is exhausted, when confidence is down, when the boat feels like it's being punished by the sea, decision-making suffers. So you've already got a problem. And you haven't even gotten to the bigger issues yet. Let's talk about what it actually costs to own one of these boats, because this is where the dream usually hits reality hard. A 40 to 44-foot catamaran will run you somewhere between $400,000 and $650,000. Step up to 45 to 50 feet, and $1 million becomes normal. That's just the purchase. Owning one is where things get expensive in ways people don't anticipate. Catamarans come with what I call the double everything tax. 2 engines, 2 sail drives, 2 rudders, 2 hulls to anti-foul, more plumbing runs, more systems, more deck area, more surface area, more maintenance points. Even when jobs aren't literally doubled, enough of them are that the annual cost gets serious fast. A reasonable maintenance budget is around 5% to 10% of the boat's value annually. For a $700,000 catamaran, that's $35,000 to $70,000 a year just to keep it in shape. And that's before insurance, fuel or financing. A typical annual operating budget for a 45-foot cruising cat breaks down like this. Maintenance and systems, $20,000 to $40,000. Dockage and moorage, $12,000 to $25,000. Insurance, $6,000 to $18,000. Fuel and consumables, $5,000 to $10,000. Add it up, you're looking at $43,000 to $93,000 a year, and that assumes nothing major breaks. That's not a detail. That's the difference between a lifestyle and a financial structure most people can't sustain. But there's something even more brutal than the annual cost, and it has everything to do with the physical width of the boat. That width is one of the Catamaran's biggest selling points. It creates the deck space, the stability, the big cabins. But the moment you try to dock it, that width becomes a tax. Marinas charge 1.5 to 2 times the normal rate for catamaran slips, because the boat occupies the space of 2 monohulls. In places where waterfront is premium, anywhere in Florida, the Caribbean, the Mediterranean, the cost becomes absurd. Some marinas simply can't fit modern cruising cats. The slips are too narrow. The infrastructure was built decades ago for different beam profiles. So you end up in premium T-head spaces or anchoring out more than you planned. And anchoring out sounds romantic until it becomes your daily logistic problem. Dinghy runs, provisioning, weather exposure, shore access, it all gets harder. But here's the part that really affects experienced owners: haul-outs. Most buyers never think about this until something breaks, and that's a mistake because a lot of travel lifts are built with monohull beam limits in mind. 22 feet is common. A standard 40-foot catamaran is already around 23 feet wide. A 50-footer reaches roughly 26.5 feet. That means a huge number of yards simply cannot lift them. Not because they don't want to, because they physically can't. Now your service options shrink. Instead of asking, "Where's the nearest yard?" you ask, "Which yard within hundreds of miles can actually handle this?" Specialized facilities exist, but scarcity creates leverage. They charge more. Multi-hull blocking alone can add 25% to haul-out costs. And if damage happens in a remote area, a repair that would be manageable on a monohull becomes a logistical nightmare. That's the kind of friction you never see in a sales brochure, but owners never forget. Now, let's talk about sailing, because this is where a lot of the catamaran marketing falls apart. Yes, catamarans can be fast. In the right conditions, on the right angles, they can be dramatically faster than monohulls, especially on reaches. But speed is only part of the story, and most production cruising catamarans are not optimized for the part of sailing that matters most: upwind performance. Why? Because they're designed for charter, shallow draft, coastal cruising, comfort, not for clawing efficiently to windward. Most don't have deep keels. Many rely on fixed mini-keels instead of retractable dagger boards. That means when you try to point high into the wind, the boat often lacks grip. It slides sideways. It makes leeway. A good monohull can point higher and convert more effort into forward progress. Most cruising catamarans have to sail lower, accept more sideways loss, and lean on twin diesel engines to make progress against bad angles. That changes how you sail. That changes what the boat costs to operate. That changes whether it's actually a sailing vessel or a motorboat with sails. And sailors judge weather performance not by brochure numbers, but by whether the boat can actually get where it needs to go when the wind shifts forward and things get uncomfortable. For a lot of cruising cats, the answer is less impressive than people expect. There's also a rig problem that doesn't get much attention. Most catamarans don't use a conventional backstay because it would interfere with the cockpit layout. Instead, the mast is supported by heavily swept spreaders and diamond stays. That works structurally, but it creates a practical limitation. On a monohull, you can ease the boom far out on a run. The sail projects cleanly. On a catamaran, if you ease too far, The mainsail presses into those swept spreaders. Chafe, pressure, potential damage. So many catamarans can't simply run dead downwind. They tack downwind instead, sailing broader angles. Sometimes the raw speed makes up for the extra distance, sometimes it doesn't. It's the same pattern over and over. The catamaran's strengths are real, but they're conditional. And the conditions where they shine aren't the same ones that define serious sailing capability. Then we get to the safety debate, and this is probably where the cultural divide runs deepest. Catamarans feel extremely safe, until you define what kind of safety you actually mean. In normal conditions, their stability is a genuine advantage. They don't heel much. That reduces fatigue, makes cooking and sleeping easier, reduces the chance of someone falling. For families, that's real. But there's a difference between primary stability and ultimate stability. A monohull gets much of its safety from ballast low in the keel. As it heels, that ballast creates a righting moment. If it's rolled too far, the keel wants to pull it back upright. It's designed to self-right. A catamaran works differently. Its stability peaks early, usually around 10 to 12 degrees of heel. After that, once you push it too far, the righting moment drops away. If it flips, it's stable upside down. Now, modern cruising catamarans don't flip often. It takes extreme conditions, 70 to 100 knots, or serious seamanship failure. But offshore sailors don't think only about what happens most of the time. They think about what happens when things go wrong in the worst possible way. And here the catamaran asks them to accept something many never fully get comfortable with. If it goes over, it may stay over. Catamaran defenders make a real counterpoint: positive buoyancy. A monohull with a heavy keel can sink if the hull is breached badly. A catamaran, because of construction and watertight compartments, often remains afloat even when badly damaged or inverted. It becomes a giant life raft. In many rescue scenarios, staying with a floating platform is statistically safer than ending up in the water. So the safety argument isn't simple. It's not that one side is right and the other is wrong. It's that catamarans and monohulls offer different safety psychologies. One gives you more stability in everyday life, the other gives you self-righting in an extreme event. And a lot of traditional sailors will always prefer the second kind of reassurance. Then there's motion, and this one matters more than people realize. Catamarans don't roll like monohulls, that's true. At anchor, that's incredible. Better sleep, less rolling, more comfort. But motion underway is a different story. A monohull tends to roll in a slower, more rhythmic way. Some people hate it. Others find it predictable. A catamaran often reacts to multiple wave patterns at once because it's straddling wave systems with two hulls. That can produce a jerky, high-frequency hobby-horsing motion in chop that some sailors find more nauseating than a monohull's slower roll. So the simple idea that catamarans are always more comfortable isn't really true. They're often more comfortable in one specific way and more uncomfortable in another. Even at anchor they create a different problem. Because they have high windage and shallow draft, they don't always swing like deep-keeled monohulls. In shifting breeze they move differently, swing wider, behave unpredictably compared to nearby boats. That creates real anchorage friction. Here's something else that doesn't get discussed enough: weight sensitivity. A catamaran's performance depends heavily on staying light. Its speed comes from light displacement and narrow hull efficiency. But because the boat has so much interior space, owners are constantly tempted to load it up. More tools, more spares, more fuel, more water, more gear, more comfort. Unlike a monohull, which can absorb weight increases with less dramatic effect, a catamaran gets punished fast. Add 10% to the design weight, and you can lose 10% or more of the speed. That's huge. More weight means the boat sits lower. Sitting lower means reduced bridge deck clearance. Reduced clearance means more slamming. More slamming means more discomfort, more fatigue. So overloading a catamaran creates a nasty negative loop. Slower, harsher, less efficient, more engine use, less sailing pleasure. That's why long-term cruising cats are such a paradox. They offer more storage than a monohull of similar length, but using that storage fully destroys the exact performance advantage that justified buying the boat in the first place. And then there's the thing that's hardest to measure: sailing feel. A monohull talks to you. It heels, the helm loads up, the whole boat gives feedback. You can feel when it wants a reef. You can sense rising pressure. That tactile conversation is what many sailors think sailing is. A catamaran often doesn't do that. Because it sails flatter, and because many have steering systems with less physical feedback, the boat feels detached. It goes where it's pointed. It feels stable, composed, almost clinical. For some owners, that's wonderful. For traditional sailors, it can feel unsettling. The boat can stay calm and flat while rig loads are quietly building. Instead of talking to you through heel and helm pressure, it simply keeps going until you're much closer to the limit than you realize. To a lot of people who care deeply about sailing, that feels like sailing with one of your senses removed. And that's a big reason catamarans still carry a stigma in certain parts of the sailing world. They're seen as floating caravans, as houseboats with masts. Not because they can't sail, but because they remove too much of the physical drama that many sailors consider central to the sport. Modern production cats don't help themselves here. High freeboard, vertical windows, huge saloons, flying bridges. They often look more like real estate than seagoing tools. Culture matters. There are sailors who will never buy a catamaran, not because the technical case is weak, but because the symbolism feels wrong. To them, sailing is supposed to involve compromise, sensitivity, seamanship, and physical dialogue with the elements. A catamaran can look like an attempt to keep the scenery while deleting too much of the experience. That judgment may be unfair, but it's real, and it affects how these boats are adopted. Here's what actually matters, though. Catamarans are succeeding in exactly the parts of boating where their strengths make sense. Charter fleets, warm water cruising, coastal hopping, liveaboard life, social sailing. They dominate where people value space, comfort, stability, and easy access to shallow anchorages. They keep struggling for universal respect in the parts of sailing that care most about upwind ability, storm behavior, service access, weight discipline, helm feedback, and ultimate recovery. Both sides are seeing something real. Catamaran buyers aren't crazy. The boats really are fantastic for a lot of use cases, and catamaran critics aren't just jealous or old-fashioned. The compromises really are serious. This is the multi-hull paradox. The industry often sells catamarans as if they're the obvious evolution of sailing, the upgraded version, the better answer. But that's not what they are. They're a different answer. An answer optimized for comfort, stability, social space, and a certain style of cruising. When that answer gets taken outside its sweet spot, the cracks become obvious. Bridge deck slamming, upwind compromises, rig limitations, double maintenance, beam taxes, haul-out scarcity, capsize psychology, weight sensitivity, reduced feedback, cultural resistance. That's why catamarans still aren't universally popular, not because people don't understand them, but because many sailors understand them perfectly. They understand that the same beam that makes them comfortable makes them expensive to dock. They understand that the same volume that makes them livable can reduce clearance and worsen slamming. They understand that the same flat sailing that feels luxurious can reduce warning feedback. They understand that the same stability that feels safe in normal life comes with a very different story if the boat ever goes over. And once you understand all of that, the catamaran stops looking like the final form of sailing. It looks like what it really is, a compromise machine. Brilliant in some contexts, frustrating in others. So catamarans aren't unpopular because they fail. They're unpopular in certain circles because they solve the problems people notice at the dock, not always the ones that matter most offshore. They solve how to live on the water beautifully, not always how to sail through it efficiently. And real sailing, especially offshore, has always been partly about how a boat behaves when life stops being comfortable. That's why this debate never goes away. The catamaran is commercially successful, technically impressive, deeply desirable, and still controversial. The closer you get to ownership reality, the more the conversation stops being about luxury and starts being about friction. Friction with waves, friction with windward performance, friction with marina pricing, friction with haul-out infrastructure, friction with maintenance budgets, friction with storm psychology, friction with sailing culture itself. Until designers fully solve the slamming issue without sacrificing interior volume, until marina and yard infrastructure catch up to wide-beam cruising platforms, and until buyers become honest about the gap between charter comfort and offshore reality, the catamaran will keep living this double life. A soaring success in the luxury and cruising market, a controversial compromise among the people who take sailing most seriously. If you've owned a catamaran or spent real time aboard one, I'd be interested to hear where you agree and where you don't. The comments section is where these discussions actually get useful, and if you want more straight, practical discussions about boats, ownership, and what actually matters when you're evaluating a purchase, subscribe. That's what this channel is built for.